This is a story about a journey through time in a country where islands, like legends, number in the thousands. This is Greece. The 16,000 kilometers of coasts are among the most scattered in southern Europe. We discover a land steeped in history, pregnant with the myths and epic tales that have shaped our imaginations. Our journey begins in the country's northernmost reaches, at the crossroads of east and west. Just off the coast of Albania, and not far from the Italian shores, we find ourselves on the island of Corfu. Corfu is the most northern of the Ionian islands. Homer's Odyssey tells of Ulysses' stay here. Corfu, or Kerkyra in Greek, was the last place Ulysses stopped before he made it back to Ithaca. From the very start, our journey bears the stamp of the gods. It's a journey that will take us along the eastern coast of Peloponnesia, then on to Crete and the Cyclades. A story of conquests and tempests, peopled with divinities and gods. We veer south in the wake of these legends. And hot on Ulysses' trail, we leave the shores of Corfu and stop on another Ionian island, the mythical land of Ithaca. After 20 years wandering around the Mediterranean, Ulysses finally reached the island where he was king and where his wife, Penelope, was waiting for him. She had never lost hope and came up with an extremely clever plan to get rid of her many suitors. But let's leave the heroes of the Odyssey to their reconciliation. We veer a few kilometers west and find ourselves on the shores of Kefalonia, an island for solitude and meditation, like this stunning monastery perched above the sea. Those drawn to the monastic life come to this mystical spot in search of answers. As if here, on Kefalonia, the contrast between the stark white rock and deep blue of the sky and sea awakens spirituality. And yet, civilization isn't far off. With winds that can blow over 100 kilometers an hour, we head east and glide between mainland Greece and the Peloponnesian islands. We meet up with this giant, whose feet are firmly anchored on the ground, despite the crumbly seabed and a depth of 65 meters. In the most earthquake-prone region of Greece, this is the Rion-Anti-Rion Bridge. There are some pretty astounding figures surrounding the construction of this huge cable-stayed bridge. 6 years of work, a capacity to withstand an earthquake of magnitude 7 on the Richter scale, and a €750 million budget. The result? You can now cross the Gulf of Corinth in just 5 minutes, no matter what the weather, whereas not long ago it took 45 minutes in a ferry. On the road to Athens, myriad tiny villages line the west coast of the Gulf of Corinth, in the heart of one of the most earthquake-plagued regions in Europe. Here, two tectonic plates continue drifting apart 1.5 centimeters per year. Just a few dozen kilometers from Athens, we have the Corinth Canal, another act of defiance to the Earth's tremors and jolts. Unlike the Rion-Antirion Bridge, the canal separates the Peloponnesian Peninsula from the rest of Greece. Linking the Ionian and the Aegean Seas, it saves ships from having to make a 400-kilometer detour around the peninsula. But the skippers of really big ships have to use extra skill and caution to navigate through. Long before tourists on their cruises could all but reach out and touch the huge walls, one needed amazing patience and ingenuity. In the 6th century BC, boats were towed over land by chariots on a paved trackway. 6 centuries later, Emperor Nero ordered the construction of a canal here to save the hassle. He inaugurated the project with a golden spade, but the flip side of the coin is less glorious. In 1 year, 6,000 Jewish prisoners had worked themselves to near death, and the project, deemed too expensive, was finally abandoned when Nero died. It wasn't until 1893 that the canal we see today finally got built. We leave the mainland behind and head southeast over the sea to Crete. On our way, we take a little detour by an island that's the pearl of the Saronic Gulf. This is Poros, a small hilly island shaped like an olive, covered in vineyards and jasmine. A little patch of paradise where easy living is not simply a legend. This enchanting island conjures a summer-like bliss with its light, salt, and turquoise water. We leave Poros behind to discover an undeveloped coast and continue our journey back in time. We follow the west coast of Peloponnesia, where a smattering of churches and monasteries catch our eye. At the southern tip of the peninsula, we spy the Monemvasia citadel, perched on a rock battered by waves and scorched by the sun. A breathtaking remnant of a Byzantine and Venetian fortress. A quick stop on the island of Cythera, where the goddess of love, Aphrodite, was born, before we hit the big blue of the Aegean Sea and another island, the biggest one of all, Crete. 80 kilometers south, and there it is, Crete. An incredible lunar landscape, all eroded and awash in ochres, greens, and blues. A unique, well-preserved, and unspoiled land. This is Balos Beach, at the northwest tip of the island. At the outermost bounds of Europe and the last rocky frontier before Africa, Crete has always been the object of much envy. A necessary stop-off on the route to the Middle East, the island was occupied by Venetians, Turks, and even the Germans. It fell into Greek hands only in 1913. But Crete remains its own separate world and has always been fiercely defended by its people. The geography of the landscape is an asset, an additional weapon. On the west side of the island, we find the gorges of Samaria National Park. A path winds its way through the eroded rock for 20-some kilometers, from the plateaus of the center down to the sea. An impregnably strategic position. The gorge has often doubled as a good hiding place and fallback base, especially during World War II. The King of Greece, along with some of his government, fled the German army across the gorge. When they reached the coast, they were evacuated in ships belonging to the British Army, which was defending the island. Further east on the island's northern shore, we have the city of Rethymnon, centered around a fortress. A gentle Crete, rich with traditions. We finally hit the heart of Greek mythology here in Crete. Island of the gods and birthplace of many a legend. Do you remember the legend of the Minotaur? Ariadne's thread, Icarus's wings. This is the land of Zeus, the king of Greek and Latin gods, born here in the heart of the island on the slopes of Mount Ida. The sky is exceptionally clear this morning. We can see the top, looming nearly 2,500 meters high. But the bare and arid mountain looks somewhat deserted by the gods. Nowadays, Mount Ida is only frequented by a few hikers who use these shepherd huts to escape from the winds. We leave Crete now and head out into the Aegean with its islands of paradise, the Cyclades archipelago. Though highly prized by the modern tourism industry, the archipelago is no less rich in its share of myths. The legend of Atlantis was born here, in the tiny Santorini archipelago to be exact. A volcano rises up in the heart of Santorini, its caldera rimmed with the stunning little white villages the island is famous for: Theron, Oia, Akrotiri. Akrotiri was one of the major ports of the Aegean Sea during the Bronze Age. But about 3,600 years ago, a terrible earthquake and volcanic eruption put an end to the city's glory days. Like Pompeii, Akrotiri was buried in ash. The seismic shock was so huge that Santorini was blown apart, and a major part of the island engulfed by a tsunami that destroyed even the north coast of Crete. Many scholars believe this calamity was Plato's inspiration for his parable of the disappearance of Atlantis. Though the volcanic ash that rained down on the island left it sterile for many years, the eruption also spawned the neighboring islets. Even if there's really no fear of another catastrophe of this scale happening today, the inhabitants still keep an eye on their volcano, which releases the occasional puff of smoke. Now we head even further west, to an island well off the beaten path of the tourist circuit, probably because it's much more austere. Halfway between Athens and Crete, this is Milo. Island of Aphrodite, goddess of love, island of colors, a volcanic and mineral island. Milo's history is linked to its subsoil, rich in sulfur, pumice stone, clay, and perlite. The island still lives off its mineral resources. And day after day, Milo gets nibbled away by the quarries which leave gaping holes in the landscape. On the more well-preserved southern coast, we find wind-whipped rocky inlets of marble, most likely the same marble that the island's most famous figure was sculpted from, Venus, the famous Venus de Milo. The statue of Aphrodite, a masterpiece of Hellenistic art, was discovered in the 19th century by a peasant working out in his field. Today, it's on display at the Louvre Museum in Paris. On the north coast of Milo, numerous sea caves double as places of refuge for the endangered Mediterranean monk seal. It's a harsh and untamed coast, eroded by storms, and the relentless Meltem wind that blows constantly from mid-morning until sundown. En route towards other little-known lands, the rocky inlets of Polyagos hold water the color of gemstones, where fish shimmer like sapphire and emeralds. Not hard to see why the gods chose to make their home in these parts. We're off again, this time heading east. We zigzag over Amorgos. This island with its rocky peaks and gulfs looks pretty familiar. Amorgos is the island in the film The Big Blue, directed by Luc Besson. The Hotsoviotissa monastery is perched 300 meters above the sea. One of the oldest and most important Byzantine edifices in the Cyclades, with a foundation that dates back to 1017. Even with a width of just 1.5 meters in certain spots, the monastery has room for over 100 monks. In 1990, there were only 2 of them left. A ferry ride away, north of Amorgos, lies the biggest island in the Cyclades, Naxos. Herodotus himself was already writing about the prosperous Naxos. Fruits, vegetables, olive oil, cheese and wine have been produced here since ancient times. Water resources, rare in these parts, and rich soil blessed Naxos with an agriculture that afforded it economic self-sufficiency. No sailors on this island. On the other hand, there were loads of artists, including many of ancient Greece's most renowned. They built the Temple of Apollo at Delos and the Delphi Sphinx. Their success was no doubt also due to another treasure tucked away in the subsoil of Naxos: marble and emery, the first for making the sculptures and the second for polishing them. Mythology abounds on the island, all the way to the islet of Palatia, where a famous doorway dating from 6th century BC stands, the monumental gate to the unfinished temple of Apollo. Continuing our journey north, we make a stop on the island of Delos. The biggest Mediterranean market for the wheat and slave trade was based here, as well as the Delian League, an alliance of sea-states founded by Athens, a sign of its former power. A cosmopolitan island par excellence. There were more Egyptian temples built here than anywhere else in Greece, not to mention the first synagogue. Today, only archaeologists are allowed to stay on the island. So to enjoy the site in relative calm, you need to wait for sundown, when you can lose yourself in reverie before the Temple of Apollo or the Alley of 9 Lions carved from Naxos marble. We're now just a hop, skip and a jump from Athens, a few kilometers west for our last stop off in the Cyclades, Syros, an island with a turbulent history. In the 5th century, the Phoenicians settled on Syros, but unlike the Greeks who sought land to farm, the Phoenicians transformed the island into a commercial hub, establishing several harbors there. The island was shaped by successive invasions. The presence of Persians, Venetians, Ottomans, then Russians, and even the French significantly fashioned the appearance of Syros, in particular its capital Hermopolae, whose architecture bears traces of the different cultures. Over the years, all these different immigrants built a mosaic of a city, a commercial and cultural center, Greece's biggest port until the Corinth Canal was dug. We leave the Cyclades, though there are so many other islands to explore, and return to the mainland. Cape Sunion, not far from Athens. In ancient times, it was known as the Sacred Point. It's the southernmost tip of the Attic Peninsula, and at its very end stands the Temple of Poseidon. Cape Sunion has always drawn visitors from around the world. All that remains of the Temple of Poseidon, built in the 5th century BC, are the Doric columns in veined white marble, over 6 meters high. This is where King Aegeus, believing his son had been killed by the Minotaur, threw himself into the sea, which is how the Aegean got its name. Our journey is drawing to a close. Just 50 kilometers from the Cape lies the impressive sprawl of Athens. Whereas in ancient times the entire city was clustered around the Acropolis, modern Athens is a sprawling giant of nearly 4 million inhabitants, built on an urban grid. But a backwards glance reminds us that Athens is above all the cultural center of ancient Greece. Its conception of truth and beauty wielded a lasting influence on the rest of the Greek world, then on the Romans, and finally the West. It's also here in Athens where democracy and philosophy were born. Our journey ends on a rocky plateau with a structure in stark contrast to the endless strips of buildings. A temple that overlooks the city and is considered one of the greatest masterpieces of ancient Greece, the Acropolis.